to contribute to the strengthening of the economies of the rich countries to help them get richer is just why are we doing that?
Why do global majority countries have to have their data extracted and exploited to participate equally in conversations about the future of the global economy? The India AI Impact Summit is leaning in hard on concepts that are important, but also often co-opted. So in partnership with AI Now and the Opti Institute, we've produced a series of interviews with some incredible people who live and breathe substance analysis and meaningful action into these concepts. And in this interview, I am talking with Karen Hao about data-rich countries. Karen Hao is an AI investigative journalist and author of the now famous Empire of AI, where she explores how AI companies seek global domination and scale as part of their business model. In this conversation, she's going to help us better understand what it means to call a country data rich. So let's get into it. So one of the first sort of frames that we were thinking about is the reaction that a lot of global majority countries are resource poor but data rich. And that this is something that comes up in a lot of summit conversations and contexts. What's your instinctive reaction to that framing that sort of the global majority countries have this wonderful asset called their data that they're here to contribute to other parts of economies?
Yeah, not great. Um, I mean, obviously, yeah, I've been part of some of these conversations as well, and every time, my skin crawls a little bit because this idea of just perpetuating the colonial dynamics of, okay, wealthy countries get to come into poorer countries and do whatever they want, extract whatever resources they want. Not just data, right? Also critical minerals and all of the things that you need to build data centers and the labor and everything, but always to contribute to the strengthening of the economies of the rich countries to help them get richer is just why are we doing that? Like, why are we repeating history on this front and increasing inequality around the world under the guise of supporting a technology that's supposed to be an equalizer and leveling the playing field globally?
Why do you think, I mean, the summit being hosted in India, I think the first global majority country to host one of these gatherings. Why do you think these nation states make that kind of a pitch? Like, what is in it for domestic policymakers and leaders to kind of offer up their population and their resources to this kind of global north colonial structure?
Yeah, I've heard this also from, like, Chilean policymakers and, from people in Kenya that there's just this, I don't wanna say cynical understanding, but a pragmatic understanding that they want to have a seat at the table, and the way to have a seat at the table is to find the role that they can play and to kind of make themselves indispensable in some kind of way to the global supply chain of AI development, and it is really hard to figure out when you don't have capital, like, what to offer instead, and the easiest thing at that point is to offer your people, your minerals, and your data. That said, I absolutely recognize and I sympathize with the position that they're in because one of the reasons why they're only able to offer these things is because of also the history of colonialism dispossessing them of the strong economic growth that is experienced by global north countries today. And so within this particular framework, it is sort of they feel a bit handcuffed in what they can actually do to get into the room and have that access. And at the same time, I wish that there was just a more expansive idea in general about how all countries should be brought to the table, not just based on them having to offer themselves up to extraction and exploitation.
So taking a step back, so you've conceptualized the big tech expansion and these infrastructures that are being built physically, but also the kind of economic systems being built digitally as a new form of imperialism. Do you want to describe a little bit of that underlying thesis that's in your book and a lot of the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, so the general argument is that what we're seeing today with the way that Silicon Valley is orchestrating the development of AI systems is pretty much a match with how empires of old operated. They're consolidating an extraordinary amount of economic and political power by dispossessing the majority of things like their resources, their land, their labor, their data, by exploiting that labor in ways where even as that labor is contributing to the expansion of the empire and accruing more value to the empire, they're not seeing it themselves. Also, empires engage in control of information flows where they try to, either through soft or hard ways, essentially make the narrative such that they can continue to do what they want and censor inconvenient truths that undermine their imperial agenda. And we see the AI industry engage in that as well by how they control what science is ultimately produced about the fundamental capabilities or limitations of AI systems. And we just don't have a clear picture of that anymore in the same way that we wouldn't have a clear picture of that if most climate scientists in the world were bankrolled by fossil fuel companies. I think the last important dimension to recognize is that there's a kind of quasi religious element to a lot of the push for the AI empire in the same way that religion was a really crucial part of colonial empires as well, where there is both this narrative that these companies are the good empire on a civilizing mission to bring progress and modernity to humanity. So there's this moralizing tenet that drives what they're doing, but also it's undergirded by these like fears around AI potentially going rogue and devastating humanity, and that is why they need to have supreme control over the development of this technology, because if it falls into the hands of the bad actor, that could be total obliteration of the human race.
So if you were advising these nation states that they want to participate in a global economy, they've been told basically AI is the primary like new vector of doing that, but they don't want to participate in colonial structures for obvious reasons. Like, are there ways for thinking about leaders in countries that have historically been oppressed by colonial structures? Are there ways for them to participate in what's going on without kind of opting into the system that they probably politically know is problematic?
A lot of countries are trying to figure out right now how to plug into a game that's already been defined by the US and by Silicon Valley, which is the large scale AI model game where it requires an extraordinary amount of resources and labor and land and all of these things. But that's not the only conception of AI that could exist. There are plenty of other types of AI models that do not require a large scale amount of resources or capital. There are very specialized, small scale, localized AI systems that have been around for much, much longer than ChatGPT and large language models. Pretty much anyone that's not the US or China, like any country that is trying to grapple right now with like what is our role in AI in general, should not be trying to just think, how do we insert ourselves into what Silicon Valley is trying to do and try to mirror or replicate or take inspiration from this large scale approach, paradigm to AI development. They should be thinking about like, what are the opportunities that AI could help unlock in our country? What are the problems that we actually need to solve? And then what are the types of AI systems that we should be developing independent of the vision that is being exported from San Francisco that is localized to the resources and the culture and the challenges that we actually have within like the African continent, for example. There's been a long history of this with deep learning in Daba and with Masakane, with organizations that have actually just thought like, how do we design AI by Africans for Africans, by using these tools as ways to preserve our language rather than to continue eroding away and having English dominate, by helping farmers increase their agricultural crop, by supporting, you know, the increased resilience of the electric grid. And I think that's actually much more visionary than just trying to build your own version of a large language model, or by trying to insert yourself into the massive, completely unnecessary global supply chain that is being used to support this pursuit of ever more skill and power consolidation among the wealthy elite in San Francisco. I guess it would be sort of like redefining what participation even means. Like, what are you actually participating in and why? And if really the crux of it is that you're trying to just be part of the benefits that AI can bring in the future, then actually the answer will have nothing to do with Silicon Valley and with their approach.
I've asked you a couple times about nation states because of the summit. Like, there's this, convening of people that like talk at this level that is obviously very global, very abstract in some ways, very like high level kind of power game style conversations. There's obviously communities that are affected by these things. So, in this
Yeah.
context, like when thinking about that kind of global level conversation, like what role do you see communities playing, and what opportunities are there? Do you think for people that are actually living in these countries to participate in discourse about the future of AI?
Yeah. I think there's a huge role for communities to play in really pushing to advance a different vision of AI development by really articulating when they are being harmed, when they disagree with the current approach and the current pace of things, and especially within democratic environments to like hold their governments accountable and also hold corporate actors accountable. Even in non-democratic environments, there's a lot of room for communities to be holding companies accountable. And we've seen some really remarkable examples of this. Like I talk in my book about this Chilean group, Cat, that really mobilized to block a proposed Google data center within their community because they were not consulted. The company was proposing to extract an extraordinary amount of freshwater resources from that community. And they were able to go on the streets, educate their neighbors, educate the local government, and bring so much attention to this fight that it did catch the attention of Google Mountain View and of the Chilean government and forced each of these actors to actually come to the table and listen to the community about what they actually need. And now Google is in the process of trying to make concessions, and the Chilean government has to contend now with many other communities that have blossomed all across Chile and all across Latin America and all across the world that are modeled after the Cat effort. One of the things I feel really strongly about is like narrative is a huge pillar that props up the empire. And their narrative only works when there's a vacuum of other information about what the actual reality of the impact of their technologies are, because their narratives are detached from reality. They talk about abundance, they talk about utopia, they talk about theoretical risks like, everyone dying, and this is just, like, not rooted in the reality of what is actually happening today with real people, average people all around the world. And so when communities don't even have to, like, be organizing an intense, like, protest action like Cat, like, simply just voicing and documenting and raising awareness to either journalists or directly on through their own communication channels about like what they are seeing within their communities helps to fill in that vacuum and weaken the ability of these companies to manipulate the narrative and then capture nation state governments and other like more powerful elite actors who are often only being talked to by the corporations themselves.
The summit performs a function for telling a story, and that story is that global leaders can come together on equal footing and talk about these topics as though there isn't all kinds of asymmetrical power relationships and all kinds of pressure being applied by industries within these countries. Do you have thoughts on how these kind of global governance moments connect to those narratives of empire?
Ultimately, these summits are just about power, and that's what empire is about. It's like people jostling to have some power, some leverage over the global conversation and try to shape the way things are. But inevitably, like as we kind of touched on, like many of the poorer countries at these summits end up just like bending themselves backwards to cater to the rich countries to put themselves in alignment with the rich country's agenda. It is sort of like a moment in which the cynical outcome is that it kind of just re-entrenches the global power dynamics and the colonial dynamics, whereas it could be actually an inflection point for especially for a country like for India being the first global majority country to host this summit. Like, that could actually be a point upon which it becomes a platform for more global majority perspectives to insert themselves into the conversation and pull the broader narrative away from an extremely uh, US and European centric approach.
Yeah, super interesting. But are there ways of using AI systems that you feel like are good examples that you think we could direct more attention to and away from some of these like scaled general purpose model applications that obviously require so much energy and feel like kind of a cul-de-sac of innovation? If energy were spent, what would you want to see if these technologies were being used in ways that were meaningful for people?
Yeah, in general, I wanna see smaller models, more specialized models, and more, models that are developed with more participation from the communities that will actually be using or have the models used on them. And examples that I often give are, like, the nonprofit Climate Change AI. They've documented all of these different ways that specialized AI models can actually have it help advance and tackle very specific aspects of the climate change mitigation problem. None of them have anything to do with either large language models or large scale AI models in general, but they're all about things like improving grid resiliency, improving renewable energy integration on the grid, optimizing the energy demand of a building or even a city, optimizing traffic, optimizing supply chains. You know, these are like things that are the actual practical ways that we can make dents on not just the quality of life for people, but also these much bigger challenges. And then the other example I often give is the Maori one in my epilogue of my book, where there's this organization called Te Hiku Media in New Zealand, Aotearoa. They broadcast in the language of the Maori people and have for decades. And as part of the broader movement to try to revitalize the Te Reo Maori language, which was almost lost because of colonization policies, they thought that they could open up this rich archive for Te Reo Maori learners so that they could actually listen to the sounds of their elders, especially the sounds of their elders who predated um, colonial distortions of the language. And so they were thinking through ways of making the archive more accessible, and they felt that they needed to transcribe the archive such that people could listen but also see the text and then be able to click on the text and get definitions of it and have it be a more interactive learning experience. But that then required there to be people transcribing the audio, and there just are not that many Te Reo Maori speakers that have that level of advanced language skill and have the time to do that work. So it ended up being the perfect example of a moment in which AI could be really useful. And so they developed a speech recognition tool for Te Reo Maori, and in going about developing it, they took a fundamentally different approach from the norms in the tech industry. They first went to the community and asked their consent for developing the tool at all, which is a
What a
process that
concept.
is completely I know, it's completely skipped over these days, right? Like, it's sad that that's radical, but it is radical, and once they actually got the permission, then they moved on to educating the community saying, like, "In order to develop this tool, we will need data. This is the kind of data we would need. This is why we would need that data. This is how we would store and protect that data once we collect it for this project to make sure that it doesn't end up getting used in other ways that you didn't actually sign off to." They started a public campaign drive basically where they got people in like a fun competition to participate consentfully in recording and transcribing and donating their data. And within days, because they had the entire community on board, they were actually able to get enough of the data to train their first performant model. And then with that model, transcribe some of the archival audio, clean up those transcriptions, and then create a positive, virtuous feedback loop on training to improve the model more and more and more. And because this was so successful, Torero Maori is unique in that there are more Torero Maori speakers than other indigenous languages. And there's also some similarities with Torero Maori and other Pacific indigenous languages. And so they've actually opened up their base model to other Pacific languages to
Interesting.
enable them to actually like replicate the same thing, but without nearly the same amount of data resources. Because some of these communities, have just a few thousand speakers or a couple hundred speakers, or some, like I've learned of some initiatives where the indigenous language only has like 4 speakers left. And so they're working with like a really, really, really limited um sample. And that
And are
is
probably
kind of,
also elderly, would be my
yeah,
guess, and then,
100%.
like,
Yeah, right,
don't
right.
engage
Like,
with
and are
technology. Yeah.
exactly. And so this to me is like the perfect, like that entire life cycle of how they approached the development of this tool is exactly what I wish we would see all around the world, because they were constantly in communication with their community to make sure that the technology was wanted, that they were designing it in ways that were actually delivering benefit, and that they were also preserving the values of the community. Like the Te Maori community really, really cares about their sovereignty. Like many indigenous communities, they really care about their sovereignty. And that was a huge pillar of the project, was regardless of what we do in this project, we will never undermine the sovereignty of our community, by somehow, giving that data to big tech or something. Those values might be different for a different community, but like the community, that community should then decide what they want and what they want to uphold. So, yeah, that I this like one size fits all model of AI development is inherently so problematic and colonial. And if we can shift away from that to thinking about a multitude of small, specialized, localized models that are much more controlled and governed by each individual community, I think we will be in a much more democratic place with AI development.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the first, things I remember having, like, an aha moment about when hearing this example is that most people tell communities that are far away from the centers of power, that if you make yourself legible to those power centers, that you will be able to generate wealth and value for yourself. So, for example, a community like that might be encouraged to upload all of their content to YouTube so that it's more accessible, which then means Google and the mothership gets to train on all of their language material and then get to turn back around and say, look, we have a chatbot that's in your native language. And aren't you excited and appreciative? And I feel like what I found most interesting at first, that was like a non-starter that they would like upload this to the mothership. And I just like, it's such a, again, radical, but shouldn't be, because it's like so obvious when you think deeply about it, that like by sharing quote unquote with these platforms, you're essentially positioning them to have even more power over you vis-a-vis your own culture in a way that's really, yeah, disturbing.
Keone Mahalona and Peter Lucas Jones, the two people that orchestrated this project and run Te Hiku Media, the phrase they always say is data is the last frontier of colonization. Like, they took our land and then tried to sell it back to us. Now they're taking our data and trying to sell it back to us as a service. There's such striking parallels with the question that you asked me in the beginning, which is that these poorer countries, now we're talking about nation states, not communities, but it's the same dynamic. The poorer countries are trying to upload their data to the mothership as the way to buy their seat at the table. But what they're actually doing is just ceding yet more power to the richer countries to lord over them and set the agenda.
Turning to the summit, do you think there like shouldn't be summits? Like, do you think that this idea that there's this equal footing for nation states and companies and civil society to like all get together and like talk about things, and like, you get this like flurry of announcements. When you think about the narrative constructs of empire and the kind of drumbeat of a lot of these projects that are trying to get as far as they can, as fast as they can, and sort of take over, do summits function as anything other than just accelerants in something?
I don't know. So I've never been to a summit myself, so it's, like, hard to really know whether what I'm about to say is even practical, but, like,
Yeah.
my feeling is that there should be summits, but they just should be designed in ways that uplift the global majority more. I don't actually know if that is practical. Like, I don't know the mechanics of how summits come together and how
Yeah.
countries end up even negotiating, being a host country, for example. Like, I don't know if India
Yeah.
had to make, like, multiple concessions about the agenda or something like that in order to even get this hosting gig. In my ignorant, idealistic
Yeah.
imagination of what summits could be, like, the idea of bringing lots of people from different countries together to have a global conversation feels important and something that should be protected, but is it possible to do that and then also make sure that it's actually a space for the countries that usually do not get heard to finally get heard?
Yeah. It's interesting. Um, I've been to one, and it very much seemed like there was no conflict in a way that makes you know that there's not
There's
actually the
plenty.
challenge of power. Yeah. Like, where you're just like, everybody's being way too nice to each other in this situation, which tells me that, like, the people in power are in control of the agenda. There's like,
Yeah.
there's nobody's feathers are getting ruffled. There's like everyone kind of got what they needed to participate.
You know, in a funny way, I do think that even moments like that, where it's kind of just it just becomes a platform for the richer countries to be at the bully pulpit, there is
Yeah.
actually it in a way utility to having every single country in the room hearing it from the
Yeah.
horse's mouth. Even if we couldn't achieve the beautiful, idealistic, everyone comes together and listens to global majority countries version of the summit, there I do think that summits also in their current manifestation help them maybe unintentionally move things forward.
Thanks again to Karen for joining me for this conversation. And as a reminder, this episode is part of a series we're doing in partnership with AI Now and the Opti Institute called Reframing Impact AI Summit 2026. We've got interviews with some incredible guests, and you can find the full series on our channel. So do check that out. And thanks so much for joining.